on page 5, project history is the beginning of a primer. One of the things that we had to do is learn about the legal structures and processes in both the local districts and the oversight of Ohio Department of Education, and we found that it was very, very complex. So we went perhaps a little deeper than we ordinarily would have in an audit to explain the processes that we found in the development of the policies, both at a federal and state level. We're hoping that these sections that follow will end up being a reference tool, if you will, for the policymakers that will be debating these issues in the weeks and months ahead. I see that I should notice that Senator Peggy Lehner, who is the chair of the Education Committee in the Senate, is joined us today. Peggy, you probably know most of the stuff in there, but perhaps some of your colleagues will find this useful. If we go forward to page 9, I want to spend a moment here under the section called Breaking Enrollment. When a student breaks enrollment for any number of a variety of reasons, the student no longer counts in that district's population for assessment, for the tests. They're counted instead at the state level, the bureaucraties as they roll up to the state. The table on page 9 and following over a little bit to page 10 lists the codes and the reasons that ODE uses to distinguish why a student broke enrollment and why they're no longer counting at the local district. Key among these is Code 71, which is withdrawal due to truancy or non-attendance. This code is the most frequently used code that we find where there is indication of scrubbing. And the state code, the Ohio Revised Code, is very specific about the legal definition of what truancy is. You can be a habitual truant or a chronic truant. And there's a process that has to be engaged in that includes a court adjudication. Now, if you look at that part of the code, what you will find is that truancy is defined in terms of non-attendance. So non-attendance and truancy are the same thing under the law. The next few pages discuss various pieces of the structure and the accountability. If you turn over to page 14, you will find a description, a summary description of our audit program. So if you wonder what the auditors were doing out in the field, this will help you understand what we were doing. In summary, what we did was initially looked at the percentage of students who took the achievement test and who also showed a break in enrollment and were rolled up to the state. We used that as a filter, and we ranked the schools, school buildings. Now, why do we do school buildings instead of school districts? Because there may be instances where individual buildings are engaged in scrubbing, but the district is not. Or the district and the schools may be collaborating, but not all buildings are included. If we only looked at district level, at the district level, we would mask, perhaps, the data that would lead us to a place that we ought to be looking. So we looked at the building levels, roughly 3,600 buildings in Ohio. We took the 100 that showed the top end. Now 74 of the top 100 schools were either in Columbus or in Cleveland. And so as to have a little bit broader net, we reduced the number of schools representing Columbus or Cleveland districts so we could dip down a little bit lower and have a broader sample. This report is what happened from that. Our audit program was, in essence, to go back to the districts, to look at their procedures, to look at the individual student files, to look at the computer systems, and determine whether the codes for that break in enrollment were justified and supported by the audit. This is all really boring. I appreciate that nobody's fallen asleep yet. On page 15, we begin a discussion of some of the weaknesses that we found. And Code 71, again, truancy, non-attendance, our standard for reviewing these files was to go back and see whether there was, in fact, a determination that the child was truant. Without a court order, a child is not truant. Why is this important? If you're a student, your school cannot be taken away from you without due process. Somebody other than the bureaucrat at the school has to make a determination that, in fact, your absences amount to a level that you should not be allowed to go to that school anymore. And what we found was we had 5 school systems out of the sample that we looked at where we had issues. If you look over at page 19, under 9.2, we have the discussion of what we're calling scrubbing for the purposes of our work, our audit. Now, I used to be, long ago, the county auditor in Delaware, and we had a very large database for our property tax purposes. And we used the term scrubbing to mean quality control. And there may be, you may see an email in one of your local school districts somewhere that mentions scrubbing. That does not necessarily mean what we are looking for here. It may be entirely innocuous. It may be similar to what I'm referring to from back in my days in Delaware County, where it simply means that we're doing quality control. So the definition that we're using for the purpose of this report, when we use scrubbing, what we mean is, for the purpose, scrubbing is the practice of removing students from enrollment without lawful reason, regardless of the purpose or purported motivation. The term scrubbing does not always imply malintent. So that is the thing we were looking for in our audit. In Columbus Public School District, we looked at 10 middle schools. In each of them, we found pervasive evidence of students who had been rolled up to the state, who had a break in enrollment that was not supported by the documentation. I want to add that this is critical to have the documentation, because without the documentations, all we have is anybody's word. Without the record, this is more than nitpicking about pieces of paper. Without the records, there is no evidence that the actions were properly taken by the government. In the Toledo, I should mention that the report also talks about how we got involved with this. Initially, even before we began our work, we had been in contact with the internal auditor at Columbus Public Schools, who had done a sample and found 81 of 82 students that she had examined the student files lacked documentation. In the Toledo Public School District, you will see in the table that they are undetermined. So why are they one of the 5 school districts? Based on interviews and their very candid discussions with us, it is clear that they had some of the same practices in terms of lack of documentation, withdrawing students without a determination of truancy, and using Code 71, therefore being improperly withdrawn without any due process. The Cleveland School District is the third one. And we initially went to a couple of schools there, pulled files for students, and found that there was no documentation at all in any of them. And we interviewed management at Cleveland Municipal School District, and we're told that they don't have any policy to maintain any of these things, and that we would find precisely the same lack of documentation in every other instance that we looked. That means that there is no audit trail for us to follow. So we have to report that Cleveland is unauditable. However, we also know that they withdrew students under Code 71, and upon information, information developed under interview with management, we find that they have not gone to court to have a truancy determination in years in Cleveland. So it's not a matter that the file might be missing or that some were and some weren't. They have made a choice not to seek a truancy determination. Nonetheless, they had multiple students that had breaks in enrollment that were not documented. The Marion City School District is the fourth. This is a little bit different kind of problem. Marion City School District has a digital academy, and their policy, which was not adopted by the board, this was just a practice by the administration, apparently unilaterally developed by the administration, was upon 4 absences in a quarter, the student, without parental consent, without the student's consent, was automatically withdrawn from Marion City School District and placed in their digital academy. The effect of that action then rolled that student up. Now, why do we include Marion for this? Once again, the documentation to support the transfer did not exist. And secondly, you have to know something about schooling. The literature very clearly establishes a correlation between learning and achievement and attendance. If you think about it, that makes a lot of sense. If the kid doesn't go to school, the kid doesn't learn. If the kid doesn't learn, they don't do well on the test. The effect, though, of the policy in Marion was that they could predict with a pretty high degree of accuracy that these kids that had attendance problems, that they were improperly rolling up to the state, would not do well on the tests because they weren't attending. I want to hasten to remind you that we are not making determination about the motivations. It is possible that some of the folks in the administration in Marion felt that this was going to be helpful. The fact of the matter is the Digital Academy had limited hours and virtually no success with the kids that went there, and they have now discontinued that. The children that were enrolled in the Digital Academy, almost all of them gained no additional high school credits and had to re-enter school the following year in the same grade that they had been. Finally, we have Campbell City School District. And once again, we had, I can read in the report, 11 high school and 29 middle school students. This is up in the Youngstown area that were lacking documentation. Well, I hope the other light doesn't go out, or we'll really be in the dark. We were able to use data from ODE, not ODE, excuse me, there are regional computer centers that multiple schools belong to, called ITCs. We were able to get data with permission of the Campbell superintendent. They cooperated, gave us permission to look at their data, and we were able to determine that the students in Campbell had actually been retroactively moved from enrollment in May and June, which would be after the test results were available to the individual school district.